Alright guys, my name is Goblin, and today we're going to be counting down the most powerful weapons in World of Warcraft from each and every expansion. The method I'm going to be using to determine which is the most powerful weapon is by evaluating which weapon provided a particular class with the most DPS actually achievable in that expansion. This will keep the video more interesting because I won't just be talking about two-handed weapons for the entire video. I'm also going to avoid talking about legendaries because I think that would make the video way too predictable, but nonetheless I will give them honourable mentions as we jump through each and every expansion. So we're going to start with Vanilla WoW, although not technically an expansion, it doesn't make sense not to start with it. So the top DPS in Classic WoW was very narrowly between Rogue and Warrior, and the weapon that all warriors and rogues desperately wanted was Gressil, Dawn of Ruin. So what's interesting about this weapon is it actually dropped from the last boss of Quel'Thalas, and you may not already know this, but only about 1% of guilds during Vanilla's lifetime actually cleared Naxxramas and defeated the last boss because it was such a difficult raid, and because it required so much preparation, so much money and so many consumables to actually get through it. So the amount of people who actually saw this weapon would be even less than the people who actually cleared it, which is already less than 1%, and the amount of people who actually managed to equip this weapon would be even less than that. So you can imagine, not many people probably had this weapon, probably only in the hundreds of people actually had this weapon, maybe even less than 100. The reason why this weapon is so powerful is very simply it has the highest DPS out of any other weapon in the game during vanilla. The main thing you're really looking at is the 257 number on the weapon, which is its highest possible damage, which scales with abilities that do weapon damage like Sinister Strike and things like that. It's strange how it has stamina on it, but I guess that's kind of useful, it's not really a DPS thing. And obviously it has the stat stick of 40 attack power, which is pretty ridiculous. This weapon was combined with the Hungering Cold, which at first glance also kind of looks like a tanking weapon with its plus 14 stamina and sword skill, and also in flat out stat stick armor stat on the weapon. It probably was more commonly used by tanks, but still best in slot offhand for rogues and warriors. Especially as the increased sword skill was very useful for non-human races to basically hit that glancing blow cap, which massively increases your DPS. If you look at the weapon very close up, unfortunately it really does seem like this weapon has a lower resolution rate than other weapons in the game. If you just look at Hungering Cold in comparison, the Gressil weapon really does not look as high quality as a Hungering Cold. Nonetheless, it is pretty cool because it has like this mouth on the hilt of the blade, which is a bit gruesome and strange. And obviously, another bit of trivia for the Hungering Cold, this was a weapon actually used in the South Park episode, and it was renamed to the Sword of a Thousand Truths, which is a good episode that you should check out, it's quite funny. However, in truth, the most powerful weapon during Vanilla's lifetime was actually Thunderfury. If you look at the stats of Thunderfury, you may be thinking, well, it does have a lot less DPS, it's actually quite a fast weapon which doesn't scale very well with abilities, but it's basically stated by Blizzard on an official blue post, which people have buried up quite recently, that Thunderfury just simply provides the most flat out DPS for rogues and warriors, according to Blizzard anyway, because of that extra nature damage that you have on it, and because of the proc effect, because the proc effect happens so often, and it does 300 nature damage, which is pretty ridiculous for a proc during vanilla. You probably find procs just as equal to that during the Burning Crusade. And obviously the effect is actually a cleave effect, so it's an AoE effect as well, which will multiply your damage even further. So now let's talk about the Burning Crusade. The top DPS in the Burning Crusade was between Hunter and Warlocks, so my research concludes, which means we're going to be talking about a ranged weapon in this section. So the best ranged weapon non-legendary in the Burning Crusade that you could obtain was the Golden Bow of Quel'Thalas. Not only did it provide ridiculous DPS for a Beast Mastery Hunter, it also provided really good stat stick with 18 agility and 34 attack power, and a little bit of cheeky armor penetration as well. However, this bow, because of its speed, was actually a little bit irritating. Like a lot of bows during the Burning Crusade, they weren't perfectly optimized for one-to-one macro rotation that hunters used to adapt into their rotation in order to optimize their DPS. Hunters use a macro very similar to the one you're looking at now, and they put it onto their bars, and that's literally the only thing they would press for the entire expansion, just one button for the entire 2 years of a Burning Crusade. There were other options out there, but this was largely considered the best playstyle to go for. All you would basically do is cast auto shot and kill command and steady shot in one macro repeatedly forever. But the irritating thing was that a slow bow wouldn't have great interaction with Steady Shot's short cast time, especially when you started to increase your haste and stuff like this, which leads me on to the truthfully best range weapon and best weapon entirely in the Burning Crusade, which was actually Thorodal the Star's Fury. So the main reason why this weapon provided most DPS achievable in the Burning Crusade was because of its faster speed, which interacted with the Serpent Swiftness talent and the improved aspect of a Hawk talent to approximately get your weapon speed to 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds you would shoot from your bow, which had great interaction with steady shot speed, and overall a little bit of complicated mathematics involved with it, but basically Beast Mastery Hunters absolutely loved this because it had great interactions with their one-shot, well not one-shot but one-button macro. Another cool gimmick with this bow is that you would never need ammo ever again, because whenever you use the bow to attack, it essentially creates its own ammo, as I can show you right here, and it has a very unique spell effect to shoot this kind of blue beam at the enemy, which is pretty cool. Now let's jump into the Wrath of the Lich King. So the highest DPS in the Wrath of the Lich King was a Fury Warrior with a Fire Mage closely following behind. Now the main reason warriors were able to achieve such high DPS largely because of the ability to wield two-handed weapons at once. So at the beginning of the expansion, warriors were actually considered one of the worst DPS in the game, but because of item scaling, about the time of Icecrown Citadel, their DPS became ridiculously overpowered, and obviously wielding two-handed weapons definitely helped with that. The most powerful weapon that a warrior could obtain was Glorenzelg, High Blade of the Silver Hand. So you could actually dual wield this item as well, so you can get 2 of them, but largely it was difficult to get 2 of them because obviously you need to hand out that loot to other warriors in your raid. So most warriors would equip Cryptmaker with Glorenzelg as well, so they'll have Cryptmaker in the offhand, especially as they kind of do need that armor penetration. Obviously the weapon DPS on this item is ridiculously out of proportion, and if you look very closely, the item level is 284, whereas everything else, like Crit Rate Maker for instance, is 277. This is because all Lich King loot actually had a slight bump in stats compared to all the other loot that you could gain from Icecrown Citadel. Obviously the weapon had 3 red sockets available as well. I'm pretty sure in further expansions they didn't go as crazy as this when it came to weapon sockets on weapons. And it will very conveniently add another 8 strength when you fill up those sockets, and the reason why it's fully red socketed is because mostly warriors optimized their character around just stacking 1 stat insanely high, which will probably be strength or attack power in those sockets, or I'm pretty sure some warriors also used armor penetration as well. Can't really remember because it's a very long time since I played the Wrath of the Lich King. Interestingly, this weapon does actually do 0.1 extra DPS to the next weapon we're going to be talking about, which is obviously going to be Shadowmourne. So this is probably one of the coolest looking weapons in the game. It has very similar stats to Glorenzelg, and obviously has the 3 red socket bonuses available to you. The only thing that kind of makes it stand out better than Glorenzelg is the armor penetration stat stick on the weapon, which is a little bit more useful than expertise, especially if you've dealt with getting the expertise cap. Obviously, on top of this, the proc effect, which is very sophisticated and ridiculous, your melee attacks have a chance to drain a soul fragment granting you 30 strength, which is in itself pretty good. When you've acquired 10 soul fragments, you will unleash a Chaos Bane dealing about 2k damage split between all enemies within 15 yards and granting you 270 extra strength for 10 seconds. Now we're moving on to Cataclysm. So the highest DPS in Cataclysm was a combat rogue, and the best weapon for a combat rogue to get apart from the legendary daggers was No Khaled, the Elements of Death. So this weapon dropped from the last boss in Cataclysm, which was obviously Deathwing, and the main reason why it was so overpowered is literally because of that ridiculous proc effect to proc for 7,653 damage to 11,481. Obviously that weapon had a very nasty proc, was by far the best in slot 1-handed weapon for every class that could wield it, Enhancement Shaman, Frost Death Knight, all that kind of thing. Another great option that people had for, warriors and Death Knights and Paladins was also to go for Gurthalak, Voice of the Deeps. Now, the interesting thing about this item was that it had a proc chance to spawn an Old God Tentacle on the ground near the player that would shoot laser beams at your enemies. And Fury warriors could also dual wield it, and it was actually used in PvP, like when you're doing serious competitive arena, because of that proc effect, and it was just totally ridiculous. Now if rogues wanted to invest the time, they could actually obtain the legendary daggers, which was the last legendary in the game to actually be a real legendary weapon, and that was Golad and Tiriosh, Twilight of the Aspects and Nightmare of Ages legendary daggers. So these are pretty ridiculous. They had a nice prog effect. They also could slow your movement speed, sorry, not your movement speed, your falling speed, like a slow fall effect, so pretty cool. The follow-up items that were needed in order to create the legendary daggers, like the Sleeper, the Dreamer, Fear and Vengeance, were also very, very good options. And mages also had access to Dragon Wrath, which, although it is more of a stat stick item, it did have a proc effect which was quite interesting, and you also had the opportunity to transform into a dragon. So yeah, a lot of cool weapons in Cataclysm actually. Now let's move on to Missa Pandaria. So according to the logs that I can find, the Fury Warrior was the best DPS during Missa Pandaria's time frame, and obviously the best weapon obtainable to a Fury Warrior was Xal'atoh, Desecrated Image of Gorehowl. So this weapon isn't actually the real Gorehowl, it's like a image of Gorehowl invented by obviously the old god Yasharaz, or whatever his name is, because Garrosh does actually leave Gorehowl behind, and you actually do see it in the Siege of Orgrimmar raid. So this isn't actually the legendary Gorehowl weapon, let's just clarify that. And unfortunately the highest DPS version available to you was pink, just bright pink with like old god eyes sticking out of it. So it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing weapon in the game, but nonetheless it was the highest DPS weapon in the game. Now we're moving on to Warlords of Draenor. So according to the logs, the highest DPS during WoD was actually a subtlety rogue. So the first time on this list we are going to see some cheeky daggers. The best daggers you could obtain during WoD's time frame was actually Fang of the Pit. Some of the coolest looking daggers in the game as well, this glowing, basically it is a glowing demon horn. Cannot complain about how cool that looks. Unfortunately there's no interesting proc effects or anything like that. It's just a flat out really high DPS item with the perfect best in slot stats for a subtlety rogue. Now we're moving on to Legion. As you can probably predict, this is going to be a very boring topic because everyone was given an artifact weapon during Legion. So when it comes to calculating this, I've looked at the highest DPS in the logs at the end of Legion, which was a Windwalker Monk. So technically that means Fists of the Heavens was the best item in, well, the most powerful weapon during Legion's lifetime. Now we're going to round off the video talking about Battle for Azeroth. Since the last raid is actually out, we can determine which is the most powerful weapon in the game. So the highest DPS in the logs during the time that I'm recording this video is I can't remember which spec, but it is a Hunter. So the best range weapons that Hunters can obtain in the game right now is Dominion, Lurker, Beyond Dreams. So pretty cool looking weapon. It's actually a gun, so first gun on this list, and it's actually rare for guns to be the best in slot weapons for a Hunter throughout World of Warcraft's lifetime. So again, another cool thing. And it's not the most impressive looking weapon in the game, in all honesty, but because it's like, but what I do like about it is how the sniper scope essentially has an old god eye sticking out of it. So that's cool, I guess. Anyway, let's stop talking about retail as fast as humanly possible. My name is Metagoblin, and to my next video, ciao.